Hi team. Everyone says the first 100k is the hardest. And while I agree it's tough, I think people get the reason wrong. I mean, the real challenge isn't the number, it's the habits. The habits, the discipline, and the consistency to stick with that saving for years, and even when the progress feels painfully slow. That's what I want to share in this video. How I built the habits to save my first £100,000 and what actually mattered, and if I were to do it differently, how I'd start again. At the beginning, almost all of your growth comes from contributions, not the investment returns. So if you save £500 a month for 6 years at 4%, you'll end up with about £40,000. And most of that is savings. Tiny bit of interest. And that means the hardest part isn't the compounding, it's sticking with the saving, month after month after month. And this is even when the results don't feel like they're moving. So this is why the habits are everything. Automate your savings, resisting lifestyle creep, and knowing the difference between your needs and your wants. And those are the things that got me to my first 100k. So where do you start? Well, it starts with Headroom. Some people call this going on the offensive in books like Millionaire Next Door. But really all this means is it's the gap between what you earn and what you spend. Now without that, there's nothing left to save and invest. So for me, that means two things. One, growing my income, pushing for promotions, grabbing side work, increasing my top line. Number two, controlling my spending, tracking what went where, cutting things that I didn't really need to spend, and keeping on top of lifestyle creep. Now that headroom is the oxygen for your saving habits. And it doesn't matter if you can only save £200 to £300 a month, or even less. The habit is the same. Now, here's the tipping point, and one of the most fun and most rewarding points of this journey. When the interest you're earning is more than what you can save. And that's when the compounding really starts to work harder than you. And that typically is before 100,000. I'm going to show you a few files I put together just to try and illustrate some of the points in these videos. The first is what I'm going to call the crossover grid. Now, as you can see on the screen, I've got how much someone has potentially saved. So if I look at the screen now, I've got, say, £75,000. If you have £75,000 in the bank earning 4% interest, you'll earn £250 a month. Simple. So another example, you've got £60,000 in the bank earning 5% interest, you'll earn £250 a month. So if you're saving £200 a month, the tipping point for you might be when you've got £60,000 in the bank earning 4%, your interest will be at least what you're saving. And that's a really rewarding point to get to, way before you get to the 100,000. Yes, 100,000 compounds faster, not as a high percentage, but as an absolute number. But that is such a rewarding point to get to. And it's something to remember and hold on to, that when you get there, you can pat yourself on the back. Habits will build your first £100,000, not compounding. But time, scale, and efficiency will compound it much faster beyond that point. When you get past your tipping point, when you get to higher values, that is when your savings will snowball. One of the biggest changes I made was automating everything. Money left my account on payday, and it went straight into my investments or savings. I didn't rely on willpower. If the money never hit my current account, I couldn't spend it. That single habit is what made saving consistent. I didn't have to think about it. Now, habits only work if you protect them. That means having an emergency fund, so you never have to sell your investments. You know, when things go wrong or things happen in life, which they inevitably do. Now, depending on how we frame this, is this £100,000 inside your pension or outside your pension? If obviously it's in your pension, then you can't get access to it until at the right age. But if this is money that you've been saving and compounding outside of your pension, then obviously you can take that money back if an emergency happens. But what we're trying to suggest here is that by having an emergency fund, you never have to sell it when things go bad. And secondly, staying out of debt, because debt is negative compounding. Paying 20% interest on a credit card completely wipes out the savings or interest of 5%. Keeping a simple budget, so I always knew the difference between needs and wants. Protecting the system, keeping my habits, gave me the confidence to keep saving, even when the progress felt slow. So what would I do differently? If I'd started again, I'd invest earlier, even tiny amounts, because the habit matters more than the size. I'd also stop obsessing over the perfect investment, because early on, what matters is your saving rate, not your interest. I'd remind myself that £100,000 is not freedom. It might feel like a lot of money, it might be transformational to many people, but it's not going to suddenly make you independent or give you enough income to live off the rest of your life. It's just proof that the system works. It's the start of a journey that will lead to higher savings, and hopefully, whether this is in your pension or whether it's savings outside of your pension, this will help you with your later in life when you've got more income coming in from these investments and potentially something you can actually use that will be life-changing. But this freedom only comes later, and it's only if you build and protect the habits. So I'm going to show you a dashboard I quickly put together today just to illustrate some of the points I'm making in this video. It's very easy to talk about things, but we need to see the examples, we need to talk it through and see what difference it makes. So we're going to start off with a classic. When people in these videos talk about saving, quite often they use £10,000 a year using some sort of S&P or something as a historic return. So if we use that example and we stick with that and we look at the screen, 10,000 a year is 833 a month. 833 a month at 7%, perhaps if we ignore inflation, is your sort of classic return, sort of 7 years for your first 100,000, going down to 5 years, then 3.8, all the way down to about a year per £100,000 in the future, and therefore that's going to get you to your million. And in total, that will take you 30 years. Now we can see that 70% of that is coming from interest alone, with 30% coming from contribution. Now that shows you just how powerful the interest element is when you're saving that much and you're compounding over that time. But let's just have a bit of fun with this and try and change some of these numbers so we can kind of see the impact of different things, changing the rates, changing your saving rate, how long this takes, and what the impact is. One of the things that I realized quite early on, particularly having kids, was, can you make anyone a millionaire? The question comes up, can anyone be a millionaire? Can you make your kids a millionaire? Can you give them financial freedom in the future? And let's stick with that example, because if I were putting in £100 a month at 7%, it would take 60 years to get to a million, when 93% of that is coming from interests. Now, if you had put in £100 every single month, and you did it from the start when they were born, and you carried on doing it, and then they carried on putting money into their pension when they started earning at least £100 every single month, if the future returns equal the historic returns of the indexes, S&P for example, then there is a potential you could have £1 million when you retire. Now, that is quite eye-opening for me, and something I'm certainly going to look into. I didn't start saving for my children early on, but something I'm going to try and catch up on when I can, and try and start to do this for them. Because even though they will be grown up one day and they will be saving into their pension, it's still good to know that that early period of time when I've saved for them has made such a big difference on the compounding of this. And it's in those early years that makes such a difference. It takes 28 years, £100 to get that first 100,000, and then it drops straight away down to 9 years, all the way down back to that sort of 1.5. And it's that first 100k that makes such a difference with that compounding journey, and how you can help them get there by doing that when they're young. Now let's look at a minimum wage worker. Let's use £21,000 roughly as a sort of an example, because nicely that gives £100 a month contributed through pensions when you opt in, and in the UK the employer contributes too. Now if you do the maths on that, £21,000 roughly gives you £100 a month into your pension. Now if you get that 7% return and you start that when you're young, perhaps when you're 20, maybe even before that, and you're doing a sort of hourly wage, and you work for, well, I'd say 60 years, you might not do it for 60 years, but the point I'm trying to make here is that there is an opportunity here to have a really big sizable pension when you get older, even if you're only putting in that minimum. So it's still very valid to be doing this, and this is why people say you should be opting in and putting money into your pensions. Now let's increase that to £29,000 salary. That roughly translates to £150 a month into the pension in the UK, which drops it down to about 54 years. Big improvement, definitely achievable then. So let's say your average salary is £29,000 and you're putting in £150. There is a good chance that you, by retirement, if you start in your early 20s, have £1 million in your pension pot. So now let's kind of take some examples from, where the average person might save. Let's say £300 a month, and let's see what that does to it. So now we're dropping down to 44 years. Now 44 years, again, very manageable. You start in your early 20s, you put £300 in on average. Of course, compounding is different over different years, and you can't average out earlier on in your life. You might be putting more in than the 300 over the period of the time. And obviously there's different mathematics on that. But let's just say that you were able to do that from day one. It's about 44 years. Now, my last example that I want to talk about is, again, going back to the £10,000 a year. Now, this is a lot of money for most people. It isn't always achievable, but particularly if you're a higher earner, if you're a couple, if you've got some disposable income, if you've got bonuses, maybe some inheritance or something to kickstart this, and you're averaging and able to put in £10,000 a year. Going back to the example of 30 years, if we can get 10%, that drops to 25 years. But even if we put it in a 4 or 5% account, which is, today quite feasible, and also a kind of medium return you'd expect, even if you diversified and you had some low risk returns, let's say 5%. Let's just see what that does to this example. So it's 36 years, which is still a long time, but you could still be doing this from your 30s, and with 36 years left, still get £1 million in your pension pot or in your savings if you were putting in £10,000 a year and getting just an average return. So it just shows you just how important this is, and just how much faster it happens. My last point I'd like to make is just the difference between a high case example like this and a low case example is the difference in that first year, but yet the relative difference in the years thereafter, because after you get to £100,000, the compounding makes such a big difference. If we look at the area graphs in all of those examples, you can see just how much the interest starts to take off and kick off. So it's so slow at the beginning here, and then it speeds up. And as you see towards the end of all of these examples, just how much of a proportion the interest is as a percentage of the value of that pot. Now, if you'd like a copy of this model, just send me a message. More than happy to share it. It's just simple interest formula, working out compounding, and just plotting it into some simple Excel files. But more than happy to share it. So that's how I saved my first £100,000 outside of a pension. Not by chasing stock tips or by picking the perfect fund, but by building habits, by creating Headroom, automating my savings, and protecting the system. It's hard. It takes years of commitment, but once you get there, you'll see that first £100,000 is the foundation. After that, the snowball starts rolling and compounding finally takes over. If you enjoyed that video, please subscribe. And if you want to see why net worth explodes after £100,000, please see this video.